Hi, my name is Jonna and I play football for Chelsea FC and for the Swedish national team. And you are listening to the Blue Day podcast.
Fellow Chelsea supporters, here at the Blue Day podcast, I am pleased to introduce you our guest today. He made 32 appearances for Chelsea, scoring 6 goals. Plus, he played with the likes of Peter Bonetti, Ron Harris, and our very own co-host Steve Wicks. Here is Teddy Maybank. Teddy, welcome to the Blue Day podcast. How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you, Keith. And it's lovely to talk to you, mate. Lovely to talk to you.
Myself have done a few of these interviews, but it is a pleasure to have you on the show today. I want to start at the beginning of your footballing journey, if I can, Teddy. Was there any sort of significant influences that made you decide that you wanted to be a professional footballer?
Well, this is really, people don't believe this, Keith, but it's the gospel truth. I mean, a lot of my friends know it's the truth. I went to a church school in Brixton called Christchurch, and we only played twice a year against a school called St Mark's, and we were played at Kennington on the asphalt, the old cinder asphalt, and we played twice a year, and I used to score a few goals. This was when I was sort of 10, 11, and what happened? I just thought we played with tennis balls in the playground, and I thought I had something about me. I don't know why. I haven't got a clue. And so I thought I was good. So I knew the South London manager used to walk by our school. I'd heard this. So, and he was a South manager and South London manager. And we just thought, I'm going to wait outside the school. So every day I used to wait outside the school, and anybody that looked like a teacher or a coach or whatever, I don't know what a coach looks like, but anybody with a tie on, I used to say, are you the South London manager? Are you the South London manager? And I did it for about a week. And eventually this chap said, I'm the South London manager. So I said, I think my name's Teddy Maybank. I think that I could get a trial for South London. And he kind of looked at me and he said, if you get your headmaster to write to me or phone me, I will consider it. So I went to my headmaster, Mr. Perry, and said, look, Mr. Perry, I've actually asked the South London manager if I could have a trial. And I said, but he needs your confirmation to say that I'm a good player. So fortunately, Mr. Perry actually rang Cowley School where this South London manager worked, and that's how I got a trial. And from then on, it was always, when the scouts come to see the area games, as in South London, East London, and from then on, that's where you get scouted, and that's how it all started.
I see. And with that, was it a case of, I'm assuming at that time you had sort of a favoured position in mind that you wanted to play in, or was it just a case of just get in there and sort of try out different positions? What was sort of your mindset going into once that trial eventually happened?
Really, it was just about running around and getting as much of the ball as you could possibly get. There was no sort of positions. You sort of, when you're kind of, as I thought I was at the time at primary school, I thought I used to just run around, take the throw-ins, take the corners, take the free kicks, used to do everything. So really and truly, I didn't have any designated position. But obviously, because I was scoring goals, I was probably playing up front a little bit more, So then it was a matter of the South London manager and his crew sort of to tell me where I was going to play.
It is interesting how that sort of started for you. Who were your idols growing up as a kid during that time?
Well, fortunately, I mean, can I say one thing?
Yes, of course.
I was born in Brixton. Our family sort of grew up in Brixton, and I lived in a little cul-de-sac at number 3 St Lawrence Road, and next door but one, number 1, was a family grew up, and they were the Lindsays, and they were a black and white couple that got married, and they had 3 or 4 children. Mark was their older one, and Mark, my brother, and I used to just go out. I think he was about a year older than me, a year and a half older than me. We used to go out into this cul-de-sac, and we lived opposite a church. And what we used to do is just go out and kick the ball up against the fence, and just mess about, the 3 of us. And I don't want to bring this up, but I'm going to. We were talking the other day, funny enough. I spoke to a chap, 2 brothers that played with me when I was really young. They were Rupert and Owen, and they were black, and Mark was black. And we were talking the other day. He sent me something, and he said he was so proud to play with us. And he thanked me for my family, my mum and my dad. They were always around our house, all the time. And racism, it does my head in, because we never had racism in our time. And we were in the height of the black riots in Brixton. We were in the height of, like, when we played for Chelsea, like the riots there. But there wasn't one single bit of racism between all of us, black, white, Asian, whatever it was. We never had. And when you're playing sport, and Brixton was renowned for blacks in the end, but we loved it. Like, we were brothers. And Mark and I grew up playing football against the fence. And it's so funny, within 2 doors, Mark Lindsay played for Crystal Palace. He played for Tampa Bay Rowdies. He played with Pele. He played with Rodney Marsh. He played with George Best. And then I obviously carried on, and I played for Chelsea and Fulham and Brighton and whatever. And it's so unbelievable that 2 poor kids, and we were poor at the time, 2 poor kids from that area grew up individually and became, top players, like professional footballers playing for, you can't get better than playing with Rodney Marsh and George Best and Pele in Mark's situation, and me playing with George Best and Bobby Moore and whatever. But it was such an unusual thing, just the 2 boys from a cul-de-sac in Brixton both grew up to be professional footballers and made their living out of it. It's a coincidence, a big coincidence, that 2 doors apart, we both become professional footballers. But when we were, and my brother played for Dulwich Hamlet and played for Wimbledon reserves. And it's amazing. We just used to sit out in, mind you, that's what kids can't do now. And also what kids don't want to do. Because there was not so many cars and traffic, we used to go out in the road and we used to just kick against the fence, and we used to get so many complaints from neighbours and that. But we used to kick the ball against the fence, and our greatest thing was one of us used to get on a bike and cycle past the other 2 that had footballs at their feet. And the idea was we used to stand on the pavement and we used to try and knock the person cycling by on the bicycle off the bike. And there was some really catastrophic accidents, ball getting stuck under the wheels, kids coming off the top of over the handlebars. But we used to absolutely love it. And we did it for hours. We'd go out, and the only time we'd come in was when it was time for dinner or it was bedtime. And that's the great advantage we had. I mean, we used to just go out and just enjoy ourselves till it got dark.
Sort of further on from your footballing journey, you eventually was scouted by bigger clubs and you came through the youth ranks at Chelsea.
Yeah.
What memories can you share of that experience with you and a few other of your teammates at that time?
Oh God, it's amazing, isn't it? You know, when I used to catch a bus down to the Oval, catch a train over to Stamford Bridge, Fulham Broadway, walk up. This is when I was 11 and 12, every Tuesday and every Thursday. And we used to train with Frank Bluntstone. And we used to train up above a part of the ground. It was in a big hall with pillars and columns. We all used to train there Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then we used to get luncheon vouchers and we used to go down to a little cafe called Franco's. And we used to have a dinner because we didn't have time to have dinner at home. And then we'd eat at Franco's and then we'd catch our train home and go back home. And we did that all on our own. I mean, I was 12 and caught the train on my own and that was it. And then obviously we all turned into professionals, most of us anyway.
What was the Chelsea youth side like back then? Because I believe Ken Sciletto was the youth coach at that time at Chelsea, and people that I've spoken to, previous footballers that have been on the podcast, have said very high praise about Ken. What sort of stories have you got of Ken Sciletto?
Well, he's sort of God to us kids. He was just, obviously, because Ken unfortunately got injured, didn't he? I mean, he was a virgin on the World Cup squad, you know, but he was our surrogate father to all of us. He was just one of those chaps that when we played with him, he actually made us look idiots as we were growing up, being apprentices, as we were moving through. He used to play in the five-a-sides and he'd he'd take the mickey. You know, he was so talented as a player, but as a bloke, he made us all feel, we probably, unity-wise, you could never surpass. And I know people actually talk about that group of players from the 75, 70 through to 80 or whatever, 79. They talk about it as a unified group of players. You will never, ever, ever find that again. That group of players, the amount of players from the youth team that played in the first team will probably be unsurpassed. I mean, Arsenal had a great nucleus of young players, but our squad, if you work it, I don't count statistics in that, but I would say probably 10, 11 of our youth team during that little period got into the first team.
And with that, there must have obviously been a lot of great characters because, as you say, the likes of Ray Wilkins came through and took over the captaincy at such a young age.
Yeah.
And other characters that people know and hear from. As you say, it is quite extraordinary, the amount of players that came through. What was the camaraderie like between that nucleus of players, including yourself? Did that help you guys get integrated well into the first team? Well,
unfortunately, I kind of left in 1976. And that's when all of my friends and that sort of start getting into the side. Obviously, Johnny Sparrow, the great John Sparrow, one of the best left backs ever. He stroked the ball. He struck the ball so well. He was a legend. And he was in the side probably, I think, apart from Chico Hamilton, I think Johnny Sparrow was probably the youngest player ever to get in the Chelsea side. But then you had John Sparrow, you had Graham Wilkins, Butchie's brother. And then from then on, you had Ian Britton and Gary Stanley and Jock Finiston and Tommy Langley. Ray Lewington, Clive Walker. You know, you can go on. And it's just an amazing, I mean, there was only a couple of years between us all. Yeah. And for those amount of players, we just kind of, as I say, I would love to have stayed just a little bit longer. But Jock Finiston, and like he was my nemesis. We are best of mates. And it's kind of, he kept me out the side because that year, 1976, I think Jock got about 26 goals. So he kept me out the side completely, you know. And then the problem is, Keith, you didn't have 25 subs.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You didn't have 25 subs. You had one sub.
Yeah.
And
you didn't have a squad of 30 like they do these days.
You didn't have a squad of 30. And also, I know it sounds a little bit mercenary, but then again, that's, you know, the nice thing about playing football, you earn a reasonable living as well. Maybe not back in that day, you know, I mean, but I'll get on to that. But, you know, when Jock was playing, we were sitting up in the old shed, the old shed, watching the game. And every time Jock scored, I wasn't giving it, hey, well done, Jock, hey, we're winning. I was putting my head in my hands and saying, oh, you rat. Because every time he scored, what did it mean? I ain't going to get a game. Yeah. And the thing was, it was sort of one of those things where when I made my debut in 74, 75, I was on £40 a week. And what we got, if we played in the first team or was sub, we got an extra £200 appearance. So our basic wage was 40, but if you got into the squad, it was £200 appearance. So you were on 240 quid, which was a lot of money then. But if you weren't in the squad and you weren't in not the 30 or 25, whatever you have now squad, if you weren't in the squad of 12, you were on £40. And it was such a kind of, it was a difficult thing to, you know, basically it was difficult to handle, you know. And all the lads, I mean, we love everybody. I mean, Ray Lewington, we missed one out there, Ray Lew. I went to school with Ray from the age of 11. And we sat next to each other at school and we went through and through and through. And again, we both went all the way. And the squad we had was just, we've stayed friends forever, you know, and they always will be. And in fact, I got a message on Facebook saying, who's ever had a friend for 25 years? Name them. And, you know, I could turn around and say, do you know what? The friends I had for 25 years are still, I could walk in a room and they're still my best mates.
You've briefly touched on your debut that was in the 74-75 season. It was against Tottenham. Funny enough, the highlights of that was on the big match that was on ITV4 a few weeks ago, funny enough.
Yeah, I know. I actually, believe it or not, I record that, and it's not to see yourself on there. It's not, well, I haven't got many games anyway, but I'm saying it's not to see yourself, but it's to see, I don't know, that period of time. I think I played golf with Glenn Hoddle the other day, and we went round in a buggy, and I've known Glenn since I was about 14. He grew up through the same period at Tottenham. And, you know, we got in the buggy, and it's like we're best mates. You know, it's not only Chelsea. It is Chelsea because ours was special, but we all, remember, us young lads all played for East, West, South London, and we've all grown up competing against each other in the area divisions, you know, and you see, as you go through, you see each other getting better and better, and then, you sign for this club, you sign for that club, and then we see each other in the youth team, and then we see each other in the reserves, and then we see each other in the first team. And it's a unified thing that era will never be reciprocated again. Never.
Because the way football has changed and the pathway that players come through, and you get some players that have come from abroad now, and it's them then becoming academy players and then ending up in the first team. As you say, it is a lot different, even from when it was in the 90s, let alone from your time. But you, as you said, made your debut. What was going through your mind when you was told that you was going to play? And at that time, it was such a pivotal game because it wasn't exactly in August. It was actually near the end of that season. I believe it was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was. I mean, what we used to do, we used to be in the changing room, right? And on Friday, little notes used to go up with the teams on for the reserve team, the youth team, and the first team. And you'd go in and you'd look on your name for the youth team, because, well, we were basically all young enough, that the group of players that got into the first team, we were all young enough to play in the youth team. So first of all, you'd go and look at the youth team to see if you're playing in the youth team, which would have been good enough. And then you walked along to the next thing and you saw the reserve team and you looked for your name, and then you went into the first team. Well, basically you didn't, you just thought youth team or reserves. And then if you got into the reserves, you were well happy, because it was such the combination league is such a sadly missed item in the football genre, really, because we used to play it on the main pitch every other week. If Chelsea were playing Fulham, we were playing Fulham at Chelsea, or vice versa, and it was fantastic. It was like playing. When you're playing on the main pitch, God, it felt great. And nowadays, young kids don't get a chance to do that. God, they don't have people don't play games for bloody ages when they're in the squad, or if they're not in the squad, they may be great players, but they hardly play. And yet we played 42 games, the same as the first team played 42 games. But at that time, when I got picked for the first team, it was so funny. It was just, there's a great picture of myself and Ray Wilkins, and we were training behind the goal at Stamford Bridge, because it was a great big arc behind the goal when they had the dog track. And it was marvellous. And we used to love it on Fridays to go and play there. And I got picked. And it was one of those things, you think, God, the first people you ring is your mum and dad, isn't it? And you just go, you can't believe it, I've been picked. And it was sort of nerve-wracking, because I remember going there, settling down, going there on the coach, and first thing I had to do was sort my mum and dad's tickets out. Because there's 65,000 or 63,000 people there or something. They always say it was 50 odd, but they never used to really. They used to hide a few thousand without a doubt. And I had to, Mum, come, where's my ticket? I said, Mum, give me 5 minutes. I've just got to get off the coach. And went and got her tickets. And then, of course, we had that, I think it was about 20 minutes where the crowd were, doing their usual thing from that time. I mean, it was the most horrific time, crowd violence there. It was the most horrific time, especially at Chelsea. Every game you went to, there was crowd violence. Something had to be done. But going there, we had a 20-minute delay, I think. And even when you watch the game, there's people running on the pitch, there's people fighting. And I remember a picture of Ray Wilkins running out, and there's people scrapping and punching each other. So it was a really kind of it was a hard time to go on, and then we had to come off and then go back on. And as I say, just playing there, it was fantastic. You can't really forget that ever. Unfortunately, we lost.
Yes. It was a game that I remember watching it back on the telly the other week. But Eddie McCready was the manager at this point. He took over the position in April of that year. What was your view of him as a coach, and not just as a coach, but as a person that obviously you would have known as a player?
Well, they called Eddie McCready Longstreet because Eddie was half blind. You know, he couldn't see further than his nose without his glasses. But he was, as a player, you know, he was revered. He was a great left back. And what was funny, we went, put it this way, we went to Dawlish for a pre-season. When we were in reserves, we went to Dawlish pre-season training. So Dario Gradi, I might be speaking out of turn here, but it's not out of turn at all. Dario Gradi used to have us when we were training. He wanted us in bed by 9 o'clock, you know, or everything strictly to his regime. And so we kind of went, oh, come on, Dario, come on, Dario. So anyway, Eddie took over the next year and we went to Dawlish. And so we started the training. And it was a nice, light-hearted thing. It was great to be together. And Eddie called us into the room. He said, right, because Eddie was with us when we went to Dawlish with Dario. And he said, right, lads, I want you in bed by 9 o'clock at the latest. And we went, oh, come on, Ed, mate. You know what it was like last year. You can't do that. And he said, if anybody misses breakfast, so what was funny, Dario was talking about 9 o'clock the next morning, but he was just having a laugh. And that's what Eddie was like. He actually kept our humour up, and we had, you know, that started it all really, because it was just one of those eras that, and he was Eddie was great, absolutely fantastic. Next to Ken, I was unfortunately there at when we interned him at Stamford Bridge, and I had to make a eulogy, and it was, you know, it was fantastic. And I just can't say enough about Ken, because honestly, he was definitely our father. And then Eddie came on, and Eddie took over, and he couldn't, because he was playing when we were youth players. Ken was there all through our growing up. But when Eddie took over, he took on the same mantle. He was part and parcel of us. Do you know what I mean? It's difficult to being a player and then taking over. And he did a fantastic job. Eddie was unbelievable. And how? I mean, there's all these stories, isn't there, you know, like what happened to Eddie, why he got a sack or whatever. We never really know. We've all heard different stories, and there's some really funny stories, you know. But he was an absolute legend.
It must have been a shock to the whole team, and obviously ex-teammates that were still at the club, knowing that he's left, and people not knowing sort of the full story even back then.
Well, yeah, you hear those things about he went in and asked for a car, and there's a funny story, like it might be just made up, but it was one of those where I think he had a chat with Tommy Docherty, and he'd done so well with the young lads, bringing them through, you know, and getting us back on the road again. And he had a chat with Tommy Docherty, and I think he was was it Ken Bates at the time?
Oh, no, I think this was before Mr. Bates. Might have been Mr. Mears.
Yeah, Brian Mears, but I'd never talk anything but great for Brian Mears, but because I love his son. And but it was one of those things where Tommy Docherty said, "Look, go in." He said, "You're going to be all right." He said, "You've done well with the first team." And he said, "Look, if they don't offer you what you offer, get up and, you know, just walk out, and they'll call you back before you get to the door." And so Eddie went in, made his point, said, "I want this, I want that." And they said, "Sorry, we're not giving anybody more than a 2-year contract at the time." And that was the situation. So Eddie got up and walked out and was expecting the shout, you know, Eddie, hang on a minute. And I think Eddie got home for 3 days without a phone call. So what Tommy Docherty had said to him, "Walk out, don't worry, they'll call you back." That was another story that people were talking about. And I reckon Eddie McCready must have rung up Tommy and said, "Cheers, Tom. That's probably one of the worst pieces of advice I've ever had."
4 days after your debut against Tottenham, you did manage to score your first goal for the club. It was in a 1-1 draw with Sheffield United.
Yeah.
What were your emotions like at that point, knowing that you're young guy coming through the ranks, you're in the first team, you've managed to get on the score sheet for Chelsea? This must have been a huge moment for you, looking back now.
Oh, well, it was like you dream of it, don't you? And the funny thing is, it was us. Me and Ray Wilkins were sitting in, and he said, "What are you going to do if you score? What's your celebration going to be?" I said, "Do you know what I'm going to do, Butcher? I'm just going to stand there. I'm not going to move. I'm going to raise my hand in the air with one finger pointing up, and I'm not going to move. And you can all run around me and give me a hug and that." So Butch said, "I'll bet you." Now, remember, we showed him 40 quid a week. But I mean, it may be a hypothetical bet, but it was meant. And he said, "I'll bet you that if you score, we will not be able to catch you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You'll be off." He said, "You'll be running around." So I said, "Okay, we'll have a bet, 50 quid. And what happened, I think Mickey Droy, there was a corner of throw-in from Spadge, and Mickey Droy headed it on. And in all fairness, I got in the right position, but it hit me on my knee and went in. So I stood there, raised my arm, pointed my finger to the sky, and I could have caught the hair on a greyhound. It was just, I shot off, and I swear it didn't matter. I was just running everywhere, and Butcher grabbed hold of me and said, "That's 50 quid you owe me." Yeah, so that was actually, yeah, I'll always remember that. I did stand still for about half a second, but after that, I was off. I was bombing. It's a brilliant day, brilliant moment.
Fantastic. Unfortunately for the club, though, Chelsea went down to the second division at that season. What were your thoughts at this time because of, as you say, the results weren't there, defeat to Tottenham. We were sort of on a bit of a bad patch sort of at the end of that season. We ended up going down to the second division. What were your thoughts and what were the team's thoughts on this?
Well, to be honest, at that age, you don't really think about it, You're there to play football. I mean, and remember, I think there was only 2 or 3 games to go, after my game. I think there weren't many games. And then when you get relegated, you get relegated. It's one of those, we weren't really in a position to absorb the enormity of the relegation. It was just, we'd just got into the side and you just think, well, we're relegated. But you don't realise, as I say, the magnitude of that happening. And it wasn't, when you think now, you've got the Premiership and then you've got, the Championship and carrying on. But it wasn't, I mean, people were kind of, Chelsea maybe not so, but people were going up and down and whatever it was. Then you just got to get on with it, But you just hope then you start your pre-season again and off you go. And you just hope that you can get into the side again, And that was what Eddie was great at. He got us all together and he said, right, now we're going to go up. And that was unfortunate because then Jock Finiston, he got into the first team. I don't know. I think I played to start with, and I didn't do that great. I think I only got six goals in about 30 games or something like that. But, in my opinion, I contributed, apart from scoring goals, I was a sort of a provider. I worked hard, blah, blah, blah. Jock, he was a bloody nightmare. He didn't do anything in the game. But I'd strike a ball from 20 yards flying in the top corner, and the goalkeeper would fly over and tip it over. And during Jock's run, honestly, he'd bobble one into the floor. I'd love Jock to hear this because when we had a meeting, when Eddie and Ken came over, it was Eddie McCready's book launch. And we got up, me and Jock, and we've always done this. We always have a laugh. And, he just used to, he'd come off his knee, it'd come off his ear, it'd come off his elbow. but it went in, and Jock was honestly a prolific goal scorer all through the youth, all through the reserves. He was prolific, but he was sort of the Jimmy Greaves mould where he was just in there. Do you know what I mean? And I'd be watching, and I thought, how did you score that? How can you possibly get it off your ear and fly into the top corner? But he was just on that roll, he was just brilliant. And the thing was, once he was scoring like that, I was playing in reserves and I was scoring, but you can't leave someone like Jock out in that year, and that's the year they got back into first division. And it was just, you can't. And I just said to Eddie, look, Ed, I don't want to play in the reserves. I want to play in the first team. And he said, look, he said, you're a better player than Jock. He said, you're a better player. Give it time. Just stay where you are. And so I gave it a bit of time, and Jock was still scoring. So I said, Eddie, look, I can't. He said, well, do you want to go on loan? And I said, well, I'll go anywhere to play first team football. Yeah. He said, go on loan to Fulham. And then the next story from then on, really.
First season back in the second division, things did get off well for Chelsea, and for yourself in particular. You scored 2 against Carlisle in August.
Yeah.
With this sort of changing of the league and you starting the season off quite well, did you see this as a chance to be the first team regular centre forward that Chelsea needed?
Well, yeah, I did. I did really. It's stupid, isn't it? I mean, as a youngster, I was an out-and-out sort of goal scorer. I'd contribute, I'd work hard, and that famous old phrase that everybody throws at you. If you've had a bad game, you've got a 6 in the blooming Daily Mail or the Sun. But the thing that came out, but he covered every blade of grass. And it used to drive me mad, do you know what I mean? Of course, you're going to cover apart from Jock. Jock probably only covered about 300 yards in the whole game, but he scored 2 goals. And the thing is, it's one of those things, you try your hardest, and I did, yeah, I did. But it was one of those things that it just didn't particularly, I didn't maybe have the centre forward position because we had Hutch up there and Bill Garner was playing, and, they were the senior statesmen. And I never sort of got that centre forward position. But also, it's nerve-wracking. You're playing and the crowd is shouting like you've got 30, 40,000 people. It's a completely different thing, and it takes time. When you're 18 and 19, 18, at that age, and 18 then was young. Now you're getting 18-year-old players and 19 and 20-year-old players like the Fodens and the Mounts and the people like that. They're just world beaters. But at that time, it was a completely different era, and you just got so nervous. You'd go out there, and if you made mistakes, it did get to you inside, But unfortunately, I didn't. As I said, that's when Fino came in and started playing well, and then that's where I sort of was getting left out. And of course, financially, as I said, if you're not in the first team, you're on 40 quid a week. And you kind of think, well, if I'm playing in the first team somewhere, if they'd have had a squad of, I don't know, if it's 15 or 16, and you were in that squad, I'm not saying you'd be happy. You still wouldn't be happy sitting on the bench. But if financially you were still getting the money in there, it would help in some way. You know what I mean? You'd be in the squad and you'd be happy to come on as a sub and do this. But if you're not in the squad, it just left you out in the wilderness. And that was the hard thing to actually stand on. I bet a lot of players left that shouldn't have left. And I regret, I had a fantastic time at Fulham, and I wouldn't, would I change it? I don't know. But just not getting in the first team and playing, after playing in the first team, was a very difficult thing to handle.
Because there was a point in your run of that season whereby you scored goals against Blackpool and I believe you scored the winner against Bristol Rovers as well. They were both in the league. That must have given you the confidence sort of going forward. But as you say, was there sort of an issue between yourself and Eddie because you did have, as you say, Jock sort of there as well as causing you some problems?
Jock caused me problems from the age of bloody 15 or 16. I mean, we were best mates. And he caused me problems on and off the field. He used to come round to my family's house, and they all used to come round to mum and dad's house. But yeah, of course he caused me problems. But it wasn't any, it's no sort of sniping or backbiting. Jock was scoring. And to be honest, Eddie said, just be patient. But I wanted to play first team football, and then going on loan to Fulham with Rodney Marsh and George Best and Bobby Moore and Peter Story, and I set off like a house on fire there, Then I went back because Fulham were playing Chelsea, and I went back to Chelsea, and a bloody Jock was still there, wasn't he? Oh, I don't know, why the bloody hell did he ever join Chelsea? If he weren't at Chelsea, I'd have probably stayed there for about 20 years. But with Jock, why the bloody hell why was he there? And I'm only saying this, flippantly. But yeah, he probably cut my Chelsea career short by about 10 years.
Well, it was quite a long period whereby you was in the squad throughout the winter months, and then in February 1976, you were out of the squad completely. I'm assuming that was with the loan to Fulham at that point.
Yeah, I was out of the squad. You can't say out of the squad, can you? Because there's only 12. Do you know what I mean? You can't say out the squad. I mean, it's one of those things. You're either in the 12 or you're out the 12. You can have a squad of players, as in all training together and all playing together and blah 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 off the first team scene, but there wasn't a squad, and everybody was out the squad if you weren't in the 12. And it's we didn't know any different then. Do you know what I mean? You imagine when there was only 11, and that wasn't too far before we were playing, and you only had 11 players, and when people got injured, off you go, shirt in. And if there's only 11 players, someone gets injured, and especially goalkeepers, then the outfield players put the goalkeeper's shirt on and in they go. There was no subs. And then when it comes to the 12 players, and that was the majority of our career. I'm not sure if I played when there was 14 people included in the squad. I don't think I did. I think it was always sort of 12. And so when you say when you're out of the squad, everybody was out of the squad apart from the 12 players that were, involved.
It was near enough a whole year since your last appearance to then your next appearance for Chelsea, which was on the 12th of February 1977 in a 1-1 draw with Millwall. Was you pleased to be back at this point? Was you maybe perhaps looking to move because it was so long since your last appearance? How frustrating was this for you?
Yeah, it was very frustrating. Yeah, it was really frustrating. I mean, mind you, if I'm not scoring, and if you're not scoring, and you can't be expected to be in the first team. And we had Tommy Langley, then there was Hutch, there was Charlie Cook, there was Finno. And, if you're not scoring, then you can understand why you're not. And as I say, you can't call it the squad. If you're not in the 12, you can understand that. And the problem is the impetuosity of youth, really. If you think back, would you say you wouldn't have moved? Because I would love to have played in that squad I scored. I'm off again, didn't I?
No,
The squad.
you've started it now. Sorry.
Would you love? I know. I tell you what. When you think we were sort of part, really, Tommy Langley, myself, we were, and Ray, obviously Ray Wilkins, Johnny Sparrow, but we were in the first team sort of before most others, and of our ilk, you know, of the youth team and the reserve team, and what I would have given to play with Wixie, to play with Ray Lou, to play with, you know, all those lads that we've grown up from being 10 years of age and 11 years of age. Because me and Ray Lou, as I say, we played for South London together, Surrey, all the way through. We, you know, and Ray knew me inside out, and he was just, well, he's the general, really. You know, he's tough as old boots, and you can't have any more respect. And his career has shown what a fantastic football man he was and has been. But to play with them, I'd like to have just hung on one more year to see how things had gone. But as I say, being a young man and you know, when I went on loan, to be honest, it was like play, and I think I scored 16 goals in 30 games or something for Fulham when I went there, when I joined. And when I went on loan, I think I scored 3 goals in 4 games, you know? And it was just that thing that actually, that miniature admiration when you go there and you score and, you know, straight away the crowd are with you and whatever. And, you know, maybe I should have stayed. But then again, when I went to Fulham, it was just, I didn't want to go to Fulham. Let's get that straight. Chelsea was my club. But the aim is to play first team football. And as I say, if there'd have been 13 or 14 in the squad and you'd have been around the first team sort of situation, then I'd have stayed. But it wasn't like that in those days. So you just, you know, you had to go where you could play, you know? And that's
How did that move to Fulham come about?
It was only Eddie said, look, be patient. And then a little while later, you know, you go and see Eddie again, and because you're scoring in the reserves, but it doesn't make a difference. In the reserves, you know, it was a bloody high standard. Don't worry about that. But it don't matter. If you centre forward in the first team and scoring goals, you cannot expect to oust him. You can't do it. He's scoring goals. And that was it. And you kind of think, well, and then he said, would you like to go on loan for a month? And then, of course, you go on loan. And as I said, Eddie said, be patient. And I said, Ed, I need football. I don't want to play in front of 500 people in the reserves, you know. I want to play in front of 20,000 people or 30,000 people or whatever. I want to play on the main stage. So he said, well, do you want to go on loan to Fulham? And then I said, yes. But, you know, obviously I didn't realise I was going to go and play with Bobby Moore, George Best, you know, Peter Storey, Rodney Marsh. And Rodney Marsh, let me say, he's a good friend of mine now, Marshy. But he was my hero because as a youngster, I trained with Queen's Park Rangers and I used to go and watch the games and that. And Marshy he was pre-Stan Bowles. But Marshy was my hero of all time. He was absolutely unbelievable. And I've told him it face to face and he's still with me. But yeah, and then when you go there, but unfortunately, when I joined Fulham and Marshy got the elbow, he said, I might be your hero, Ted. He said, but the minute you walked in, I got the boot out the door. So it's just a funny old adage, really. But yeah, that was it, really. But when I went back to Chelsea, I'd love to have stayed with Chelsea. But, you know, you don't ever know. If Jock had carried on scoring like, for another 3 or 4 years, I wouldn't have got a game. And my ideal scenario was to play first team football.
Would like to touch on current events now if I may, and one particular question that I do sort of ask all my guests, and it has been an interesting question. It's been one that's divided a lot of opinions, and that is VAR. So, Teddy Maybank on the Blue Day podcast, what are your thoughts on VAR? Are you for it, against it? What sort of views have you got on this particular topic?
I think as far as being a permanent fixture, I think it's got to be. It does need to be tweaked. It does need to be tweaked. And, you know, where rules are rules, you know, I always think in offside situations, and it is being tweaked a little bit now, but in offside situations, if it's a finger or arm or blah, 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 or head, you've got to give the centre forward or the forward player the advantage. And if it's dead level, you know, you've got to give the centre forward or the forward player the advantage. But I do think that for fouls and goal line scraps and ball being just over the line, it's got to be there to stay. And once it gets tweaked a little bit, it will be beneficial to the game. I mean, it does stop the flow of the game, and the crowd do get. But let's put it this way: World Cup 1966. Jeff Hurst scored his second goal or whatever it was. It's hit the bar. If that was a goal, and when Frank Lampard scored and the ball was over the line, if you had that, remember this is people's livings. This is countries' expectations of winning things. And if you went back to these vital goals and these vital fouls and these vital offsides, if they'd been there then, it would have changed the whole course of football. And I think having it now, as I say, it will take a little while, but it's got to be there to stay. It's got to be. And some of the tackles, you know, I mean, in our time, tackles were tackles. And Ron Harris, tackles were tackles. And you used to get 2 or 3 tackles, or no, let's say you had 1 or 2 tackles from the centre half. And it doesn't matter how hard the tackle was, the first tackle. They could have basically broke your leg from behind. And many people did, I mean. But the centre half had 1 tackle or 2 tackles for nothing. And then the referee would say, OK, that's enough. But that tackle could have put you out of the game. And I think now you've got to have something that will, although football's a non-contact sport now, it's nowhere near the game that we played. I mean, the fitness is much superior nowadays. But tackling and, yeah, VAR, let's cut it to the chase. VAR has got to stay.
There have been some controversial moments in VAR. I think the one that sticks in my mind was the disallowed goal that Werner had against Southampton a few weeks ago. Azpilicueta allegedly fouled one of the Southampton players in the build-up to it, and it was 30 seconds later Werner scored, and all of a sudden VAR overturned it. It was, for me, still one of the most shocking decisions I've seen at Stamford Bridge. But VAR, yes, as you say, it is here to stay. It's a technology, software.
What do you think?
Well, I'm partly a fan of it. The goal line technology, I think, has been long overdue. I think it should have come in long before it eventually did.
Yep.
But I think with VAR, as people in charge of it, I think they need to be coached and educated better on what to look for when it comes to certain decisions.
You think players should maybe be up there in charge of VAR, knowing that what's going on in football and knowing how people make changes. And, you know, do you think that maybe it might be a good thing to actually coach ex-players to look at the VAR thing and then have them judging rather than referees. Because referees, they obviously know the rules, but they don't know the actuality of football. They don't know what goes on behind the scenes. They don't know who's saying something in someone's ear and doing this and doing that. But do you think that footballers would be good to coach as VAR officials?
I believe it's something that should be at least considered. Whether or not the referees would like it, and in fact maybe even the Premier League would probably be against it, because then who do you then go for with ex-players? Do you go for, with all due respect, ones that are from the 60s or 70s, or do you go for ones that are just recently retired within the last 12 months? And you've also got the other sort of problem of, as ex-players,
You can imagine if you could have like Ron Harris, right? And you could have another. And then you could have people like Stan Bowles and Rodney Marsh and Gianfranco Zola that were on the receiving end of those tackles. Now, both would have a different opinion, I suppose, wouldn't they? Like Buller and that would say, oh, well, that's a fair tackle. But you see, you've got to have someone more in the modern day era of football, because if you had someone older, like, as I say, like Ron, and I mean, he's still competent, he could still, he could still judge a game, but he would look at it completely in different ways.
Yes.
To a ball player, wouldn't he?
Yes.
So he would say, oh, that's all right, that's it, But the game's moved on, so what you've got to have, definitely now, you've got to have someone that has played within the last 15 years. Because the game's changed categorically, hasn't it?
It has, and it's something that hopefully will eradicate itself. Hopefully we'll get less controversial decisions like we have done in the past. But another question that I wanted to ask you, Ted, before we do wrap this up, is obviously talking about the current day Chelsea and sort of, again, how different the club is even from the late 90s to now. But Chelsea are top of the league as we're recording this, doing quite well with Tuchel, European champions, of course. What's your take on the current day Chelsea?
Well, I think, can I say one thing, Keith?
Yeah, of course you can.
When it comes down to it, the first sort of foreign manager came in and changed the whole look of football, really, was Arsene Wenger, right? When Arsene went into Arsenal, he changed the whole, and I'm friends with Liam Brady and Sammy Nelson and all those chaps that used to play at Arsenal. And he changed the whole training regime. We used to train like from 10:30 to 12:30. And then, or 1 o'clock or whatever. And then that's it. We just used to go off. And when Arsene came in, and when I went to PSV Eindhoven, we trained from 9:30 till 12, went home, had lunch, came back, trained from 2:30, whatever it is, till 4. And that was it. You didn't have any chance to go and do your betting or your snooker or you had to go back to training. And when Arsene Wenger came in, he changed the whole look of football, as in training, as in diet, as in management. And my pre-match meal when I was at Chelsea and at Brighton as well and Fulham, my pre-match meal at 11:30 was steak, egg, chips and beans. Now, when you think you're playing 3 hours later and you've got that, you didn't think about it, some people ate on it, some people did. But I think really and truly, football now, I mean, Chelsea, I think Tuchel's been a revelation. I felt sorry for Frank, but I think he was a little bit out of his depth. And it was a little bit too quick, because he was almost still a player. And it's one of those things where, you know, Frank may come back, but he might have had a taste and think, no, I don't want to do that anymore. But when you've got Tuchel, he's coming, he's an experienced coach, and he's bought the players. I mean, I didn't think that the team would do as well as they can, as they are, because they play is so complicated, it's so tippy tappy, you know, football. And I didn't really see, but when Lukaku came in, I can say this honestly, I wouldn't have bought him. And
okay, interesting.
I'm still not completely sure of whether he, after 6 months, I'm not sure that he's going to be the answer. But I think the side, I mean, Azpilicueta, I mean, he's just done so well. Yeah. And the fullbacks now, and Kante, and, you know, they're all great players. And I really want them to do well. But I'm just not sure we've got the out and out. You see, when I look at Liverpool, and I'm not a football support, I mean, I love watching football. But when I look at Liverpool, overall, you've got Man City, they haven't got a centre forward. You know, you've got Chelsea, they've got Lukaku now, but they didn't really have a centre forward. You've got these people that are making runs and everybody can score. But do you know what? The defining thing is when you look at Liverpool, they just have three of the greatest sort of centre forwards with all their motion and their movement and whatever. They've still got the adaptability that Chelsea have got. I want Chelsea to win the league. But I'm not sure. And listen, time will prove me wrong or prove me right. I'm not sure. I think Timo Werner, even now, I mean, the crowd sort of still got on his back and I've been through that myself. And it's a very difficult thing to come out, even though you're an experienced professional, to come out with that hostile sort of feeling in your head to perform to your best. But I think Timo Werner will definitely win the crowd over. But my only point is I'm not sure on Lukaku.
Interesting.
He's very strong and I don't think he's as technical as the rest of the Chelsea side.
As you say, time will tell. Maybe he'll come good in the end. I mean, Chelsea spent a lot of money on him, and this is his second spell at the club. Of course, he was there.
I wish him well. I wish him all the best, obviously.
Final question, Ted, and what's been, for me, a great interview. And again, thank you very much for your time today on the podcast. How do you look back on your time at Chelsea?
Well, when you think that I actually sort of started at Chelsea at the age of 11 and 12 and left at 19, 20, they're probably the most informative years that a child could have. And I call myself a child because at 10, if you look nowadays and say a 10 and 11-year-old, you'd still call them a child, wouldn't you? And yet we were catching the trains over to train and meet up like after school. Those 10 years were, I don't know, it's flashed by, but it was when you were training, we used to paint the dressing rooms when we were apprentices. We used to sweep the stands. You know, you wouldn't get a 15-year-old now signed for a club would probably be on £5,000 a year or £5,000 a week. You know, we were on 15 quid a week. We used to go up to the stands and sweep down all the rubbish off the stands and train, paint the dressing rooms, clean the boots. That, I think, is more like I don't mean to put it in this as serious as this, but it was like when you join the army, you kind of do things. And what we did, we cleaned the dressing rooms, we cleared all the kit up. That sort of thing brought you all together. You were all humble, and it was Mr. Osgood, it was Mr. Hudson, it was Mr. Charlie Cook. It was, everything was so disciplined and it was so respectful. I think that has all gone out the window now, really. Kids of 15 and 16. Could you imagine a kid of 15 signed for a club now, washing the dressing room floors, cleaning the baths, sweeping down the terraces, painting the change rooms? Could you ever? And what that did, that brought us all so close together. And we will always remember that humble side of us all, where we weren't footballers until we made sign professional. Before that, we were dog's bodies. We trained, but we were dog's bodies. We were just like apprentices, and hence the word, being an apprentice. There's no such thing anymore. We had the best time of football that there will ever be.
Well, Ted, as I said, thank you very much for coming on to the show. I appreciate your time, and it's been great to actually listening to your stories from Chelsea, from an era that, of course, was way before my time, and a lot of sort of are from our supporters, but there are some that do still appreciate your efforts in a Chelsea shirt, still appreciate Ray Wilkins and appreciate Mickey Joy and players of that era. So, again, thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much. And the one thing is, always appreciate that side of football, that era of football, because it wasn't financially your life. We would have played, and if you ask any other interviewee, we would have played for nothing. And that we basically were. No, but we would have played for nothing. If you said, do you want to go out and play a reserve game or go out? I remember playing once over a park when I shouldn't have been playing because I was an apprentice, and I played against Tony Grealish. And the reason was I was playing for my dad. And the reason we played, we could have got injured and that, but we played because we loved it. And I think if you asked the players nowadays, are they playing for the money or are they playing because they love the game? And I tell you what, it would be if you put that on the scales, I'm pretty sure it would go one way.
It probably would in this day and age, definitely.
Yeah.
But Teddy, thanks for coming on to the show. All the best, and hopefully we'll see you at the bridge one day supporting the mighty Chelsea again. I'll
be up there fairly shortly, my man. And listen, Keith, thank you so much for giving me the chance. So lovely to have a chat.
Pleasure's all mine.
All right, my friend. God
bless you.
Take it
easy.
You, son.
Chelsea!
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.